Hi, my name is Karla Martinez. I am a sophomore at McAllister College, and I am a comp sci chemistry double major with a math minor. And yeah, I'm originally from Laredo, Texas, but I was raised in Mexico, so that is home for me. But yeah, let's just get into the questions real quick. So for the first question on how to handle answering a question that I may not have the specific answer to or that I may not be sure how to approach, I think the first good step would be to kind of clarify with the student and kind of collaborate on the question. So for sure asking them clarifying questions to understand what they're getting at or what part of the problem it is that they don't understand, and also kind of guiding them to sort of think through what they're confused about. So I would say something like, can you explain what you've tried to do about this question or what specifically has been confusing for you? And I think that this kind of encourages the student to also think through the process that they're using to solve this question. Um, and it also kind of helps guide the discussion. I would also kind of refer back to resources that I've kind of gathered beforehand. So, of course, I can um, refer back to the content that is on the Codepath platform. Not only the new one for the students, but also for myself that I've kind of done in the past. I do have quite a bit like extensive notes from class that I've taken before, so this is also a good resource for me to sort of kind of help guide students through something I may not have specifically done before, but something similar, and also use that to sort of um, get through that question. What else? I would also encourage other students kind of chiming in and giving their input as well. So if there are other students present at the time, I would ask them for their thoughts, and this kind of creates an environment where their ideas might be something that we didn't think about between the two of us when we were trying to solve it. So that's also a good thing to practice, and definitely if we are unable to come up with an answer together, try to follow up with that student. So I would say commit to finding a correct answer and following up with them. I've been in the situation where I've asked a question to a TF and they got back to me on Slack. And I think that that was really helpful. So that's something that I would definitely like to practice as well. And that kind of also reinforces the mindset for students that the teaching assistants are there to be a resource and be help even outside of the classroom. So I think that this is really positive as well. And also kind of remind them of umpire at all times. I feel like that was one of the main aspects of the technical interview prep class that I took that was helpful for me, and kind of understanding how to kind of understand, match, plan before implementing is really important. So even if it's a question that maybe we can't come up with an answer in the moment, being able to analyze the process and pinpoint the things that we need to think about for the next question would be like a really meaningful learning experience rather than just getting the right answer. So that's something that I would definitely steer students towards if it was a question that I might not be entirely sure how to answer. Um, and then for the second question on how to encourage engagement with students who may not have their cameras on or their microphones on, definitely there are always students who may not feel comfortable, or there might be a lot going on in their background, or it just so happens that is what the situation looks like. And I think the first good thing to do is kind of try to break the ice. So maybe I would start with like an informal question of how people are feeling about the content. What are the things that they are hoping to take away from like that specific session that day? Or is there something interesting that they learned today that they kind of want to talk through before we get into the actual practice, or something that wasn't clear during lecture? So I think that that's a good way to kind of get them on a low stakes. Let's start asking questions. So for sure start with that, and then to kind of also keep an eye out for the reactions that I get to that. So if cameras are still off, like still encourage people to put things in the chat, or type questions that they might be unsure about if they don't want to say them out loud, and even use reactions. Like emojis and stuff like that to kind of communicate what they're thinking. And that could be a good resource as well. And maybe even like assigning roles as well. So maybe a student was contributing to a previous question, or they were working on something similar rather before the question that we're kind of tackling at this point. So bringing them back into the conversation and asking, hey, this kind of looks like what you were working on. What do you think? Maybe not so much calling names to not put anybody on the spot, but to ensure that they understand that it's a collaborative space and that it's much more helpful for them and for their fellow students to have that confidence of this is a space where we can learn, and this is a space where maybe none of us know the right answer, but for sure we can work through it and see how far we can get. So again, checking in for comfort levels and making sure that they understand that it's not necessarily a do or die kind of situation, but it's always a we're gonna practice and we're gonna get the most out of it. So kind of staying with that encouraging attitude, I think it's really helpful. So that would be my way to kind of steer the conversation towards students collaborating, even if they're not really being talkative or really expressive at that moment. So for the technical prompt, so kind of to like explain Flexbox a little bit. So flexible box layout, it's a way that we can organize items in a container so that we are able to adjust their size, position, spacing, and that way we don't have to do a lot of complicated things with CSS, which is really convenient. So I would say it's just like an amazing way of making resizing and arranging a lot easier. So the difference between justify, content, and align items. So a good way to think about it is one of them will be your main axis and the other one will be your cross axis. This is a definition that you will come across in different places. And so we can think about three main things when it comes to this. So we can think about how things line up inside of a box, how much space each of them takes up, and whether we should keep them in the same line, wrap them up to the next one, and things like that to keep in mind. Again, this is web dev kind of approach, so it's always like very much think about how accessible, think about how convenient, think about what you want it to look like, so always keeping that in mind as well. So I think a good way that I would explain it so it's less broad and a little bit more personable would be, think of a box of candy, for example. So you have your box, which is your container, and then inside that box you have the candies, which are your items. And using the box, you can move your items however you want. So you can do side to side, and that's left to right. And this is what justify would be. So you can think of it as lining the candies that you have along the row inside the box. So you can think of things like, do you want them all the way to one side? Do you want them spread out evenly? Do you want them maybe all in the center? So all of those things you can do with justify. And then up and down, top to bottom, that would be align items. So you can imagine stacking candies inside the box. So at this point, I believe a lot of students have either taken some sort of variation of discrete math or even data structures, which would be great. So think of a stack. You always care about the top of the stack. A good way to think about it as well that I really like is thinking about it as like a stack of plates. You can only take the one in the top because that's the one you care about, and that's the one that you would not be able to take anything in between because everything would break. So that's a good way to think about it as well. So stacking the candies inside the box. Do you want them at the top? Do you want them all the way at the bottom, smushed to the bottom of the box? Or do you want them to fill the height of the box? So pretty much the key difference is that justify will move your candies from side to side, and align will move them from up and down. So that's a good way to keep in mind. So then we can say, yeah, so main axis, going back to that, row or column, it depends on what you're working with. And then your cross axis is how your items are going to be stretched. So that would be justify and align top to bottom, align. We can look at examples right now. So I prepared a couple of examples that I think are better at visualizing. I believe that kind of seeing things in graphs or visual examples is much more helpful. So for example, different things that you can do with align items. So like we said, align up and down. So inside your box, you can do flex start, which is at the start at the top of your box. So you can do something like this. Again, this would be easier on a Zoom call since you can just share your screen. But as you can see here, it's at the top, so flex start, and you're moving it up. The entire thing, you're not changing anything else other than your the position in the box. So a very similar situation happens with end, and you can see that it's at the bottom, and we're just moving the entire thing down to the bottom. And I think that's a good way to kind of represent it. And then we can also do center, which is a very similar concept. We're moving the entire thing without changing really the spacing because we're just aligning it. So, yeah. And then if you want to do something different, like stretch it, you can also do that with, sorry, I said justify, with align. Yes. And then we can also visualize justify in a similar way. So like I said, this is side to side. So I don't know if it's very visible here, but for this first one right here, you can see that it aligns to one side, which is the start of our box, and everything is mooshed to that side. And then to flex the end, which is the same thing but the opposite, instead of the start, we do the end. Again, mooshed to the end of the box. If you want to do something a little bit more complicated, like spacing in between, you can also do that as well through justify. And then you can also center your items as well, so you can moosh them back together into the middle. So you can do that as well. And you can also space around. Oh, for this one, you would have to have space around each of your boxes. So it's kind of similar to the center. Yeah, it's kind of similar to the center because the center, you don't want your items to touch any edges of the box, so you would have like a little bit of space in between your boxes and the actual box, like this space that you see here, right here. This is the end of the items and this is the beginning. And then for space around, you kind of don't make that difference, but you have only like the space. So yeah, those are some of the things that I would kind of like talk through, and just make sure that if there are any questions afterwards, we can kind of discuss them. I can also share my notes. I am always open to that, and I think that kind of annotating things makes it much easier to understand these concepts. And once we get down what each of these does, we are able to kind of pseudocode and then go into actual coding. So that would be my approach to teaching that. And if there are any other questions, please let me know. And thank you so much for your time.